Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Andrea, and today we're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about boundaries, why they're so important, and I'm going to share with you guys tips to help you successfully uphold them. And I mentioned in this video that it's for insecure people, but of course this video is for anyone who's trying to uphold their boundaries. I just mentioned the insecure part because when I started building my boundaries and stuff, I was a very insecure person. I know there's a lot of people out there who feel like they're not capable of upholding boundaries. They don't feel confident, but I'm just here to tell you, you can do it, and I'm gonna try to help you, okay? But first, let's talk about what a boundary is, just in case any of you are confused. So, a boundary, in my opinion, is basically like the limits you create between yourself and other people. Like, what type of behavior are you willing to tolerate from others? What standards do you have for yourself? The part where we get stuck on is actually implementing the boundary, right? I think a lot of us will say things like, man, this person keeps crossing my boundaries. This person keeps disrespecting my boundaries. The key here is to remove yourself when people disrespect your boundaries. You don't wait for people to listen to you. You remove yourself. I don't think people get that enough. I'll give you guys an example. In one of my previous relationships, one of my boundaries was not allowing my partner to raise their voice at me. And I told him, like, if you do this again, I'm going to leave this relationship. And then, of course, he would do it and do it again. And I would tell him, like, you keep crossing my boundaries. And I would be so frustrated. I'm like, I have this boundary. He keeps crossing it. But the truth is, I should have left because that's what it means to actually follow through with a boundary. When people don't respect it, you leave. And maybe in your type of boundary, it's not necessarily leaving, but you have to make sure your boundary gets accomplished. I think one of the major reasons a lot of us struggle with fully implementing our boundaries is because we're not connected to them enough. Now, stay with me. I intern at a private therapy practice, and it's really cool because I get to see a lot of people and their problems. And one of the biggest things that people struggle with is establishing boundaries and upholding them, right? No surprise. And my supervisor, who's a licensed therapist, told me, Andrea, the reason a lot of people struggle with boundaries is because they're not emotionally connected to them. And that really got to me. I'm like, whoa, she's so right. When you're emotionally connected to something, you're more likely to follow through with whatever that is. People, you guys, will fly across the world to see somebody they feel emotionally connected to. People will learn a new language for other people that they like. If you don't know why you have this boundary and why it's so important, of course you're not going to follow through with it. Maybe one of your boundaries is having no contact with an ex, okay? That was one of my boundaries with a previous partner. The way you're gonna be able to uphold that boundary of no contact is by reminding yourself why you're doing it in the first place. Why is it so important? For me, it was important to have no contact with this person because they affect my emotional well-being. They make me, feel terrible. And I want to move on. I want to let that in the past already, right? So anytime I'm tempted to break that boundary, I remind myself why I have it in the first place. And it's super important to create an environment that supports your boundaries, okay? And this environment can look a little different depending on the boundary that you're trying to uphold. But for instance, for me, one of my boundaries is not talking to a previous ex. And what I had to do to make sure that they would not get access to me was I had to block them. There was no point in allowing them to message me and then just ignoring the messages. I just blocked them. I made it easier for myself, okay? I love my free time outside of work. So with my emails from work, I will log out of my account, delete the app, and I'll re-download it once I go back into work. It only takes a minute or so, and that helps me establish boundaries with work. You need to make your environment work for you, in other words, and sometimes you have to be extreme. You need to prepare beforehand. If you know you struggle upholding a boundary, prepare yourself for it. What are the things that you struggle with, and prepare solutions for it. For instance, if you know, I don't know, putting a boundary with a partner or a friend is going to result in them being sad, and that's going to make you feel bad, and it's going to get you tempted to not want to uphold your boundary. Mentally prepare yourself for that. Okay, I already know I'm going to react this way, but I'm not going to allow myself to get overwhelmed by my emotions, if that makes sense. Don't let emotions catch you by surprise. Be prepared for them. Practice the scenarios that are going to happen when you're trying to establish a boundary. Like maybe you're leaving a really bad relationship and you already know this person is going to react really badly. Prepare beforehand. Maybe bring somebody with you when you're doing the breakup. Do whatever you need to do to ensure you'll implement the boundary, okay? Also learn to be okay with discomfort. This is where people end up giving up on their boundaries because they hate feeling uncomfortable. And I think this is something that happens a lot with insecure people because setting boundaries makes us feel like we're being a bad person. We're used to being people pleasers, and putting our needs first just feels a little odd. It's going to take a while before it feels good. I'll give you guys an example. I grew up in a traditional immigrant Mexican family. I'm the only daughter in my family, and for some reason to my mom that meant that I'm her little therapist, and I always felt guilty to want to establish a boundary with that. And it wasn't until I just did it, and of course it didn't feel good. I was ugh, right? It took a couple of days or even weeks, I think, before we started having normal conversations again. I think just in the beginning, when you've never really established boundaries, it's going to be hard, but that should be expected. I think a lot of people just aren't used to suffering at all. We're not used to any sort of discomfort, and I think that's very unhealthy to a certain degree. But I'm just here to remind you, you're gonna be okay. Emotions will not last forever. I think a lot of us overthink when we're establishing a boundary, is this person gonna view me differently? Blah, blah, blah. Many times people will actually respect you more. If your friend cuts you off because you couldn't go out with them, on the weekend, I don't think they were probably a good friend to begin with. It's normal for people to have negative reactions. Learn to not take it personally. This just goes back to focusing on your well-being. Who cares how they feel, whether it's negative or not? How do you feel? A lot of us will prioritize everyone else's needs except our own. I used to be very hesitant to establish boundaries with one of my previous toxic relationships because I didn't want to disappoint my partner. I was very afraid of how they would feel. I don't want to make them feel sad. Or maybe I didn't want to make my mom feel sad that I had to put this boundary with her. But I was always focused on them and not myself. What about my well-being? Because if you think being nice is going to get you farther, it's not. Okay? You're just going to end up feeling depleted, and you won't feel depleted right away. It'll happen over time because you're not being true to yourself. Being true to yourself is upholding your boundaries. A lot of us are just too understanding of other people, and it will prevent us from being able to uphold boundaries. You don't have to be understanding of people's actions. In fact, boundaries are about not giving second chances, at least in my opinion. I'll give you guys an example with my dad. Now, I don't mean to put him on blast, but me and my dad, he's a great person, by the way. We will have a lot of conversations about different topics. We have a lot of debates. And one thing I used to hate about him is that whenever he felt like he was wrong or he felt like I'm winning, right, he would start raising his voice, and I hated it. I told him, you can't be doing that. That's a boundary. I am not going to engage in these conversations with you if you're going to raise your voice at me. I'm just going to remove myself. It doesn't matter if you're my dad. And he would be like, no, I didn't mean to raise my voice. It was just because, what did he say? Because he was very passionate about the topic, or because he didn't like what I said, and that, he just didn't agree. And it's like, yeah, you cannot agree, but you don't have to raise your voice. And I could have very much been like, you know what? You're right, Dad. Like, let me allow you to raise your voice because you didn't mean it that way. You didn't mean to hurt me, even though it's hurting me. I don't know if this is the best example, but I think a lot of people, when we establish a boundary with them, they'll tell us, like, oh, like, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. People can have explanations for their behavior, but it doesn't always justify them. It doesn't mean you need to bend your boundary or be understanding. Now that I'm talking about my dad, that just reminds me, like, don't be afraid to establish boundaries with people who are close to you. In fact, establishing boundaries with people who are close to you is probably going to do you the best. It's probably where you need boundaries the most. And I think a lot of us need to not assume the worst about the people near us when it comes to establishing boundaries. More often than not, they want you to feel good, but you can't be mad at other people for not respecting your boundaries if you're not setting those boundaries with them and making it clear to them what you want. Before I end this video, I just want to emphasize the importance of having boundaries and standards for yourself. Having these things will prevent you from being in situations that can be very hurtful. It'll keep mediocre people out of your life. It'll prevent you from settling in all kinds of situations. And it'll allow you to just live a happier life. Because I feel like deep down in our core, we know the boundaries we want to have with people and stuff. And when we don't stay true to them, we feel terrible. We might even feel depressed. So it is your duty to have boundaries and standards. Protect your heart, okay? I'm telling you from experience. Don't allow people to mistreat you. I really hope you guys got something out of this video. And yeah, that's it. I love you guys. Bye.